All right, so I'm going to ask that people keep their audio on mute unless they've been recognized by the chair. And I wanted to welcome everyone to this forum on public safety dispatch options for Manchester by the Sea. We've had a lot of discussion about this up to this point, and tonight's going to be an opportunity for residents of the town to ask questions and get the answers to their questions. Hopefully get the answers to their questions. So ground rules for the way that this particular public forum will operate. The chair will recognize a member of the public for questions or comments. And only residents of Manchester by the Sea may comment or ask a question, with the exception of those individuals who've been given permission in advance to address the forum. And these individuals are, of course, the town administrator, the director of North Shore 911, and a representative of the current full-time Manchester by the Sea public safety dispatch staff. Regarding all comments during the forum, there are the following limits, and this is just so that we get as many people to have an opportunity to share their interests, comments, questions, and concerns. First, all comments are to be addressed to the chair, not to other members of the board, the chiefs, or others. If you have a question for them, for any of the people who are here who have information, address it to me and I will ask them to go ahead and answer. That way, we're going to eliminate crosstalk between board members, the town administrator, members of the public, and it helps to keep the conversation going in a way that's clear without long dialogues. In regard to comments, we would like you to limit yourself to one topic in your comment or question, and or about 3 minutes. And that's going to be at the discretion of the chair, whether you've moved on to another comment or whether you've exceeded the time frame. That doesn't mean you can't come back and have another comment or another question. But if there are people who have raised their hand and are in the queue to ask a question, I'd like to get to them first, and you can join the end of the line. Come back again. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity to try and exhaustively answer people's questions and comments and hear their comments. So in that regard, we'd like you to use the raise hand function in Zoom, which is down at the bottom of your screen. Oddly enough, it looks like a little hand. And if you click on it, it comes up like my hand just did. And it pops you up to the top left-hand side of my screen so that I can see you and recognize you. Okay. Any questions about those guidelines or concerns about those guidelines? Okay. I'm not going to do the kind of presentation that we did at the beginning of the last public forum. I think that most people who are here have seen what's on the website, the Manchester by the Sea website. They may have gone to the North Shore website. I know some people in email have communicated with me that they've actually talked directly to Allison, the director of North Shore 911. And there is one screen that I will be sharing at some point, and that's the breakdown of what the options are and what they cost. So at some point in the conversation, I will do that, but I want to start out with any questions that people have right off the bat of the Board of Selectmen or of the people who are here, the two chiefs and Allison.
If you did start video.
Excuse me. I'm gonna.
Where's that? Hold on, wait a minute. Just give me a second. Oop, there we are, but we don't want to do that. So if you want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
I want to hear though. I know.
Suzanne, I'm going to ask you to remain muted. You can talk with whoever's in the room with you, but the rest of us are trying to conduct a forum. If you have something that you want to say to the group, raise your hand using the hand function at the bottom of the screen. Okay. When you are recognized by the chair, I'd like you to give me your first and last name and your address in Manchester by the Sea. Okay. So jump right in and start with Mr. Coyne. Go ahead.
Who is this for?
You, Mr. Coyne?
Yes, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Robert Coyne, 115 Beach Street. And my comment is this has been going on for quite a while, and it seems to have been focused on the fact that the relatively new fire chief claims that they need to have 2 dispatchers. And I just don't know where the need is and what the history might be that would demand this type of a change based simply on that desire on the part of the fire chief. And so that's my comment. I think it's something I've really been untried, that it's tried once before, didn't work. Now it's coming back again. We got people here that know the town, know the geography, and I think this is something that needs to be considered, even if there is technically supposedly some kind of a savings. So that's what I pay my taxes for, and quite satisfied with the job. Police and fire, professionally trained, do a wonderful job. And that's my comment. My vote is a strong no. It's not necessary, and it doesn't result in any kind of further safety factor for us residents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Coyne. I want to correct one thing, that this was not initiated by as you referred to him. His name is Chief Cleary, and it has not been initiated by Chief Cleary. This whole effort has been initiated by the Board of Selectmen, and it was in the works to take a look at this. Now that the North Shore 911 Regional Center has been operating under state direction, and has been doing that for, I think, 3 years now. So this was not tried before and failed. We have never joined the regional center.
I think what's his name? Your husband had to fix it for me once.
Okay.
I'm checking. See.
Suzanne, I'm going to ask you one more time to remain muted unless you're recognized by the chair. If that's not possible, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the meeting. Until you're recognized by the chair, and you get recognized by the chair by raising your hand. Okay, please do that.
How do you raise your hand on the TV screen, on the computer?
Down the bottom of your screen, if you're in Zoom, there's a set of icons or buttons, and one of them says raise hand.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Was that you, Mr. Schwartz, that asked that question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, could you please identify yourself and your residence?
Don Schwartz, 8 Ocean Beach Street, Manchester.
Okay,
The function of dispatch. In one of the things that I read that was put out, it said that it basically took some information, then put someone on hold and got back to them. But my understanding is that dispatch is a very vibrant, dynamic function in which someone is talking to someone. And very often there is a need for simple human common sense and judgment made by the dispatcher. Am I correct on that?
I'm not sure where you saw the information that someone called into dispatch and was put on hold and someone would get back to them.
It was on the dispatch services for Manchester summary, or the dispatch operations and options frequently asked questions. And I was surprised, and maybe that was an error, but it referred to the fact that Middleton could function as well because basically somebody puts them on hold and gets back to them. But let's leave it at that and assume that.
Let me clarify one thing, that in neither Manchester by the Sea nor in the regional North Shore 911 in Middleton does anybody get put on hold.
Excellent. Okay.
Okay,
Then-
that doesn't happen. That dispatch is involved in public safety, potentially life-threatening public safety, and I know that Allison could be very clear about that. And I'm pretty sure that Chief Fitzgerald and Chief Clary could be clear about the dispatch here in town.
Thank you for the clarification. Then I object strongly to moving it out of the town because it's a vital function. It requires human judgment, and none of these so-called more advanced computer algorithms and programs are going to substitute for a good person, a good cop on the phone live. It's an essential function, an essential link from people, between people and the police force. And anybody who has interacted with these smart artificial intelligence programs knows very well their limitations. So I strongly support Chief Fitzgerald's desire to keep that function within the town.
Mr. Schwartz, I'm very happy that you called in and that you're participating in this forum, because there's a number of misconceptions that you have about dispatch, and particularly about the regional center dispatch. Would you like to respond to this gentleman, Allison?
Sure, I'm happy to.
Okay.
As Mr. Chairman stated, that's completely incorrect. There's no computer, artificial intelligence, or algorithm handling 911 dispatch anywhere in the state of Massachusetts, including both Manchester by the Sea locally at their PSAP and Chief Fitzgerald's department, as well as the North Shore Regional Dispatch. We are staffed by human beings, well-trained dispatchers from all over Essex County and beyond, who handle the processing of the 911 calls and the dispatching of the police, fire, and EMS services. Our dispatchers are trained for 6 months to a year, and in many, many facets, which I won't digress on unless people have specific questions. But that is a strong misconception that I do not want to pervade out in the public. There's no artificial intelligence working. Perhaps the gentleman is referring to a computer-aided dispatch. That's just a computer program that all dispatchers use, and I believe they use at Manchester PSAP as well. So it's just a tool, just a computer tool. The person answering the phone is a human being. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. It is true that I took the emphasis on getting more advanced computer tools. And I carried it over to some of the maddening experiences that we've all had with computer programs that try to pretend that they're human beings. And thank you for making that clarification. Nevertheless, there was a great deal of emphasis, as I understand it, particularly in the economic area, about the need to have more advanced and upgraded technology. And to the extent that that kind of hard financial analysis plays a role in the decision-making, I really want to suggest that even including the computer-aided devices that you're speaking of, that comparatively speaking, those are low-tech compared to a local dispatcher. I want to repeat that. A local in-town dispatch human being is much higher tech, even without these so-called advances in the computer-aided things.
Okay, Mr. Schwartz, I want to reiterate what was just said, and it applies to both the Manchester by the Sea dispatch and to the regional dispatch. They use software to assist them in the process of handling the call, identifying resources, and getting the resources out to aid in whatever the call is about. There's really no difference whatsoever between the regional center and our local dispatch in terms of the use of computers in the dispatch operation.
But there must be a major difference in the judgment exercised. A quick decision often needs to be made by the best dispatcher. And if it's a local in-town dispatcher, he's talking live with somebody by phone. He knows the community better. He knows.
And that's also the case, as you were just told, at the regional center. It's a live, real honest to God human being. And the Board of Selectmen and Mr. Fetishfield have all been to, and Chief Fitzgerald and Chief Cleary have all been to the regional center and observed them in operation. And I can guarantee you that there are, during the day, 4 dispatchers and a supervisor. During the evening, 4 dispatchers and a supervisor. And at night, 3 dispatchers and a supervisor at all times at the regional center.
I accept that. My point is that the Manchester dispatcher, the dispatcher located in Manchester, is better able to make a judgment on the overall situation and the call more quickly. That's my point. Not that they're any more a human being than the person in Middleton, but my assessment still is that they have a better judgment about the situation from the town.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I think Kathy was next.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and would you please identify yourself with your full name and your address?
Yes, I'm Kathy Bellata. I live at 21 Pine Street.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have 10 years of shared services, business case review experience, as well as 30 years in IT. I was an executive at a Fortune 100 company where these types of business cases were reviewed continuously to determine when it was a good idea to engage in a shared service operation. I would say thank you for the financial information that the town provided. However, I have 2 questions. One regarding the technology conversation. As technology continues to get more complicated, I find that the estimates for the in-house solution, keeping the dispatch in Manchester, those numbers look a little low to me, and it just doesn't pass my, I guess my spidey senses up a little bit. It seems a little bit understated. I do think the shared services operation overall will save the town money. However, it still is unclear how much. So I appreciate the opportunity to ask someone from the regional center. So if we go with the regional center and we use that service for free, essentially for 10 years, when during the 10-year period would we get an estimate of how much we would have to pay in years 11 and beyond to continue to use the service?
Allison, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. So there's not an easy answer for this because it's based off of state 911 budgets within the Commonwealth under the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security's budget, something that I'm not necessarily privy to the entire package of the budget year after year. However, it's a 10-year IMA, and every about a year and a half before any IMA, intermunicipal agreement or a contract, if you will, about a year and a half before they're set to expire, all the parties sit down and look at it again, trying to give everybody as much lead time as needed for budgetary reasons and planning. I know that, not to speak for my executive director of State 911, however, the intent is to try and keep the cost at zero or as low as possible, even after year 10. That is why it is so important that we're trying to get the message out for towns that want to onboard now while we still have capacity within our budget. This isn't Bible, but generally state budgets don't tend to decrease unless some drastic action happens. So if our budget remained even static or the same, and we could fit Manchester in, for example, at zero, which we're pretty confident that we can based off of just our general knowledge of the size and scope of the Manchester dispatch needs, it most likely would be able to be carried through. But again, if anything were to change, we would at least a year and a half start looking at contract renegotiations to make sure that all parties involved had as much advance notice as possible. I hope that answered your question.
That did. Thank you.
Kathy, I'd like to also comment that the spreadsheet on options and costs has been set up with a total cost over a 5-year period. And when it comes to capital costs, the capital costs may involve updating equipment and renewing software licenses above and beyond the $270,000 that's been projected.
Could I ask a follow-up to that question? Briefly?
Yes.
Just briefly, what I saw in the summary was that there was a $15,000 per year expected IT cost, some sort of capital investment, and then an upgrade of some sort in 5 to 6 years, if I recall. I would just ask the board, I don't know where those numbers came from, but it is not likely that software would be untouched for 5 or 6 years. The more complex software gets, these first responders of ours need the best that we can give them. And unfortunately, a small town such as ours may find that it just gets too expensive for us to give them the tools that they need. So I would suggest that if for some reason the town does not join the regional center, you look for other cost sharing opportunities with other towns for the technology piece. Technology is cheaper when you can buy it and service it at scale to ensure appropriate monthly patching to prevent cyber attacks and things of that nature. So even if you don't go with the regional full service approach, I would suggest that the town look at some other cost sharing option for the technology piece to make sure our first responders get the best that we can afford to give them. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself and your address?
Sure. Sorry, I'm Amy Battis. I'm at 23C Desmond Avenue. I think at the last meeting, there were 2 items that we were going to follow up on in subsequent meetings. I think one, the spreadsheet with the financials wasn't exactly an apples to orange comparison, and I wasn't sure if that had been adjusted so that it was more accurately comparable between the two options. And then I think the other thing is that members of the board were going to visit with the local dispatch. And I was curious to see if that had happened and what the result of that was.
Okay. I am wondering whether this would be a good time to share my screen with the spreadsheet that's up on the web to discuss the, as you said, apples to oranges and apples to apples comparisons. Greg, I'm going to share this and have you take people through it. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfectly fine, Jeff.
Okay, so. Okay, can you see that screen?
Can you make it a little
Yes.
bigger, or we can see it pretty well. I don't know if you can make it a little bigger.
Yeah, that's just borders.
No, I mean, it's legible. Legible.
It's all clear.
Okay. Greg, go ahead. If you could take us through this and just explain the.
Sure. So this is in summary form, the comparison of the various options that we have talked about. Obviously, there are additional options, but these are the basic ones that we have discussed. So we first see in the first column after the different items where the arrow is, we have in-house, we have the current operation. And so in that current operation, we have one dispatcher on per shift. We have a total cost of $406,000. We have a grant of $70,000, giving us a net operating cost of about $335,000. And then I go on to talk about lobby coverage because that has been a concern. And so under the current operations, lobby coverage is provided by the dispatchers. They serve that dual role. And so there's no additional cost for lobby coverage. And so our total cost remains the same at that $335,000. And then finally, we look at a projection of capital costs over the next 5 years, being $270,000. And then we project the total cost, the annual operating, that $335,000 times 5 years, plus the $270,000, gives me a 5-year total cost of just under $2 million, $1.9 million for the current operation. And then the second in-house option is when we would have 2 full-time dispatchers on 24/7. So that's a doubling, basically, of our current operations. So the cost, again, I won't read every number, but you see that essentially a doubling of the cost for the operations. The grant amount is projected to be the same based on number of calls. Obviously, our net cost basically doubles. And again, we still have the dispatchers providing the dual role, and they have coverage of the lobby, so there's no cost. So again, we project 5-year capital expenses, same as under the current model. And the 5-year total cost, those annual $700,000 plus times 5 plus the 270 gives us a cost of $3.8 million over the 5 years. So then we move to various options under the North Shore Regional 911 Center. And here we see different options depending on how we treat coverage for the lobby. So under the first option, we call it the virtual lobby option. So again, how many dispatchers on? There's 4, typically 4 plus. There are no costs associated with that, assuming that that's confirmed in the feasibility study, which we expect it to be. The lobby coverage in the virtual model is provided by the regional center through a remote audio-video system in a enhanced lobby at the police station. So again, there's no cost for that. That's included as part of the regional center's service. And so the total cost remains at zero. Did show a small amount of capital cost for improving our lobby, the $18,000 to make that one-time expense. And so then we look at three different versions of staffing the lobby. And so the first one that shows not relying on the virtual all the time, this would be providing a staff person, a receptionist in the lobby for 12 hours a day or 1.5 shifts. No operating costs because of this is being provided by the dispatching operations are being provided by the North Shore Regional Center. But we do have the cost of providing those 1.5 shifts every day, 365 days a year. And that is roughly $135,000. And then I project that cost over a 5-year period to get that just under $700,000 cost. Stepping up from 1.5 shifts, we go to 2 shifts. So it'd be 2/3 of the day. The cost of that obviously is higher than 1.5 shifts. So we have a cost of $192,000 annually for those reception function in the lobby. We still have, in both cases, the $18,000 capital upgrade to the lobby, because when we don't have a receptionist staffing the lobby, we would be relying on the virtual lobby monitoring by the regional center. And then in the last column, you see providing receptionists 24 hours a day. So staffing all 3 shifts, 8-hour shifts, 7 days a week. So 24/7 coverage for receptionists, an annual cost of just under $300,000. With that model, we would not need to do the capital upgrade. And then you project that $290,000 over the 5 years, and comes to just under 1.5. So these cost assumptions were based on today's dollars. We did not adjust them for inflation. We were just taking today's cost and doing the simple math of multiplying it over 5 years to do a rough comparison of these, what are now six different options, the 2 in-house and the 4 options if we were to go to the regional center.
And I wonder if Chief Fitzgerald could comment on what the lobby traffic is on average on a daily basis.
So I did a dispatch walk-in, let me pull it up here, analysis. Over starting in 2016 to 2020, our highest year was 2016, actually, with 765 walk-ins for that entire year. Most of the walk-ins happened between 8 and 4. The next highest is between 4 and midnight. However, we still have an average of 40 to 50 walk-ins a year between midnight and 8. Our highest year was 2018 when we had 40.
And in those walk-ins, Todd, are they all requesting public safety services, or are they requesting other things as well?
So what I found was between the hours of 8 and 4, a lot of it is to drop off paperwork, renew firearms licensing. But most of the time on the overnight, it's someone that needs police service. So we're not getting the walk-ins for, drop off the paperwork and the licensing issues.
Okay. Anything you want to add to that in terms of walk-ins?
No, that's about it.
Okay. Chief Cleary, how do you handle walk-ins at the fire station?
Well, during the day, with COVID, the building has been locked, but we do have a buzzer in our lobby that they ring the doorbell and it rings throughout the station. If we are in the station, we come forward and meet them. If not, there's a number to call. They can call and leave a message on our voicemail if we're out of the building. But if it is emergency, there's an emergency button that rings into our dispatch in Manchester, so they can connect directly with a dispatcher if it is in fact an emergency. So if we're out of the building, the station is dark, but they can call and leave a message, or they can call dispatch. And there is an emergency button if for some reason they have an emergency and we're out of the building. But it's just an audio button. There's not a video camera in there at that point.
Okay. And when you say you're out of the building, you don't close the fire station.
Well, the building stays
You would
locked.
be out, you would be out on a call.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, all the apparatus would be gone. The overhead doors would be closed. The front door would be locked, and we'd be out operating at a call.
Okay. Okay. All right. I want to go back to the question that has been raised, or the questions that have been raised about budgeting, and see whether there are any further questions about that. I can leave the sheet up for now, or we can go back to full Zoom without sharing that screen. Do people want to leave that sheet up?
Not necessary.
Okay. Let me call on Mike Rosmarin. Mike, can you state your full name and your address, please?
Hi, Jeff. It's Rosmarin Lane, Manchester, Mass. I have a question for Jeff, and I'm going to ask through Jeff the questions for Allison. And just curious, I'm starting the premise that this thing is no cost, because it means that we're going to be more attacked. The state tax.
Mike,
Anyway,
your audio, Mike, is coming through very choppy, at least on my end.
Yeah.
And other people are
Okay.
shaking their head. Is there anything you can do
Right, let
about
me
that?
it's different. I'm going to try turning off my video. See if I can pick up with. Is that
There's still a
any
ring.
better?
It's a little bit better, but there's still a ring. Let's see if we can do this without, we'd like to see you, but let's see if we can do it with your video stopped.
All right, let's do this. I'll ask questions, I'll slower. I don't believe the cost, because that Jeff's cost is still going to be paying for this taxpayers. But the question I have is for Jeff, if reduced it by this to the N911.
I'm sorry, Mike. I really cannot understand your question.
It's
Could
coming
you-
through.
Could you try, if you call in on phone and don't use your computer, that may be helpful. But your voice is so choppy that it's very difficult to understand your question. I'm going to ask Greg, are you also having problems with that?
Yes, no, I'm not able to understand. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we really want to understand your question or your comment. And
Jeff, what is the call-in number? I'm going to call right now.
let me see. If you go to the website and go to where the Zoom link is and click on the agenda, not the Zoom link, but the agenda. When the agenda comes up, you'll have, I'm trying to see if I've got the agenda up. Hang on one sec.
Let me go to agenda. Selectmen, fuel events.
Yeah, this is Eli. I have the agenda up. It's black. I could read the number.
Here we go. File up by your location. Okay,
So I can,
301
Okay, Eli, go ahead.
Yes.
75
Telephone.
8592.
I think he's got it. I think he just dialed it.
Go. Try it again. Just
He'll have to turn off his audio on his computer.
856. 856. We've got 546. Jeff, can you hear me now?
I can. Did you shut your audio on your computer off?
Yes.
Why am I getting an echo? Okay, Mike, try and
Muted.
go
Okay.
ahead. There's still an echo, but try and go ahead and see if we can get the question.
Okay, Jeff. Let me.
Close your browser so that you're not on Zoom at all.
The browser is closed. The issue is I'm going to mute the TV. Okay. Here's the question. I don't believe that there is a no cost to this. It just means we're shifting our taxes to the state instead of to the local level. So somehow this is being paid. However, I do have a question, Jeff, and this is for you and for Allison, these questions. If we're going to reduce the budget by all this money, does that mean that we're going to actually add police and fire? Because what are we going to do? We're not going to suddenly reduce our town budget. So what's going to happen with those extra funds? That's the one question. And Allison, you referred to all the 4 dispatchers and all the different dispatchers that are on different shifts. We have 1 dispatcher right now, and that's basically per 5,000 people. These 4 dispatchers, how many people is it going to be serving now, and what's the current projection? So it's 4 dispatchers per what population? Because right now we're at one dispatcher per 5,000 people. More important, and Chief Fitzgerald is aware of this because I thanked his force profusely. Allison, I want to know what would happen different in this situation. It was early August, I believe it was. This is a real police situation that we had. Early August, 3 in the morning on a Sunday. We're sound asleep upstairs. And all of a sudden we hear, we don't hear anything. We hear some rustling around the house and we see what look like a lot of takedown lights all over the place. My wife basically says, Mike, there's someone knocking at the door. I rush downstairs quickly and I say to Andrea, call 911. I want to know let them know something's going on. While I'm downstairs at the door, she's saying, it's the police here. What happened is that someone spoofed our phone number to the police. And it just went to the police and there was no one there on the spoofed number. And this was our house number. And the police tried calling back and there was no answer because obviously it was going to a spoofed dead end somewhere. So they sent a SWAT team basically to the house. What would happen differently, Allison, under that circumstance, if any? Because basically our number was spoofed. The police knew our number and basically had a task force here because they thought something was going on. So Jeff, those are basically all my 3 questions and I'm going to hang up my phone now and pick up on the computer. Is that okay?
That's fine, or you can stay on your phone and hear it on the audio on your phone, but if you have both of them on, it creates echoes.
Exactly. That's why I was just going to go back to my video. I like to watch
Okay.
TV screens.
Um,
Thank you.
I want to respond to the first question, which was, what's going to happen with these savings if we participate in North Shore 911? And the answer to that question is that depends on town meeting. The money is in the budget, would still be in the budget under public safety. And the money could be reallocated. I'd like Greg to speak to this. Could be reallocated to the requests that we've had for more public safety staff. So I'm going to turn that part of it over to Greg, and then we'll come back to Allison with the second part of your question.
So in terms of the other needs, I'll first talk about fire. So the better standard for safety of personnel and better service is to always have 2 in and 2 out. So the 2 in, 2 out rule. So if you're going to an active fire, you always want to have at a minimum 2 firefighters on the outside of the structure if you have to send firefighters inside the structure. So currently we have 3 people on each shift, on each group on a 24-hour shift. We rely on call firefighters or other career firefighters to return and do a call out to staff up. And so if we had 4 on at any one time, we would immediately have that 2 in, 2 out capability. This also comes into play for back-to-back ambulance calls. I think I'm remembering correctly, we probably have in the vicinity of 70 to maybe 100 simultaneous calls in a given year. And again, you want a minimum of 2 people responding to each ambulance call and being able to take a patient to the hospital with 1 riding with the patient and 1 driver. So that's a minimum staffing. So we struggle. We had a more robust call force in the past. Like many communities, we have seen a pretty significant drop off in our call firefighter force. So the fire chief and previous fire chiefs have been requesting strong consideration of moving towards 4 career firefighters on. So that would be an increase of 3 firefighters. We currently have 12 plus a floater, so we have 13 career firefighters plus the chief. So going to 4 on every shift would mean 16 firefighters. So 3 more. Be nice to have a floater to fill in on leave time, vacation, sick time. So that's on the fire side. On the police side, we have always relied very heavily on reserve officers for filling shifts. So when a regular officer is on vacation or sick leave or during training, et cetera, we have relied on a cadre of reserve officers. Police reform law that has recently passed has mandated that all reserve officers basically have the exact same training as full-time officers. We anticipate that we will most likely lose many of our reserve officers since they will now have that full officer training and they will be able to get full-time jobs. And so it'll be very hard for us to keep reserve officers. So it is likely, and we're still trying to assess the full impact of this. And again, both chiefs can speak to their issues, but it is likely that we will have to consider hiring additional full-time officers instead of relying on reserve officers for backfilling vacant shifts.
Okay. Chief Fitzgerald and Chief Cleary, do either one of you want to add to that?
Jeff, I just have one point of clarification or comment on the reserve officers. Basically, we haven't received the full details from the Mass Police Training Council on the bridge academies for reserves, but it all appears that by the July 1st of 2024, any reserve officer who has not attended a bridge academy or gone to the full-time academy will no longer be able to work. So that Greg is correct in saying, as of now, there would be no more reserve trained officers. We will all have to be full-time academy trained.
And the implications of them being full-time academy trained are?
The implications are basically, so we would obviously pay to bridge them or send them to the full-time academy. They're still working out the details of the bridge academy. But that would make them eligible to take full-time jobs elsewhere, and it'd be cheaper for larger communities such as Beverly and Gloucester and so forth to take these people that are already trained on Manchester's dime. So, moving forward, we're going to have to come up with a plan to think about how we're going to staff those hours that the reserves currently take on a daily basis.
Okay.
And with respect to the firefighters, 2 in and 2 out is the standard for firefighter safety. That's what the other chiefs have been working towards with staffing. That's what my goal would be. We only have 5 call firefighters, only 3 of whom are EMT trained, and 1 recently who's a firefighter 2 just passed his paramedic and will likely be taking a full-time job sometime here in the near future. So we'll be back down to 4 with a 2nd call firefighter in paramedic school who will likely get a full-time job elsewhere. And then we will drop to 3, and we'll only have 1 EMT out of those 3.
Okay. So the issue that was raised in terms of what happens with this money is that the money will be reallocated for public safety. It's not going to just go back into the general fund of the budget. The needs for both departments are strong because of changes in police reform law and changes in people's participation in call firefighting, which has dropped off all across the state and across other states as well. The reliance on call firefighters has been a great service, but it's not going to be available in the future, or only minimally available. So we do have a lot of public safety needs in terms of increasing department strength in both departments, and the monies that might be saved in dispatch could be moved into hiring officers in those positions. When I said originally that that was up to town meeting, obviously any budget proposal that was made by either fire or police would go through FinCom and go through the budget process and have to be voted on during town meeting, the annual town meeting. That's what I meant by it's up to town meeting. Now, the second question, if I can capture it, is there was this is a very specific situation, but there was a person who used a home phone number that was out of service to call 911, and when there was no callback available, dispatch sent out officers to do a check on the house. The comment was made, Chief Fitzgerald, that they sent out a SWAT team. Could could you clarify whether that was a welfare check or whether more officers were involved in that particular call, if you're aware of it?
I don't recall the specific details, but I'm assuming we would know if we sent out a SWAT team, and I don't recall that. So I would assume it's just the shift that responded to the home.
And now I'd like to go to Allison from the Regional Center, the director of the Regional Center, and ask her if a call came in and the party was not reachable after the call came in, and the call identified the house because of where the number was, what would North Shore 911 do with that call?
Sure. So there were actually two questions just about our staffing. Is it okay if I just
Yeah,
back
yes,
that question? Is
yes.
that okay? I just want to make sure that the gentleman's questions are answered. So currently our staffing that you all have listed of 4 dispatchers on days and evenings and 3 on the overnights, that's based off of assessments that we do for our current 5-town population. And so we currently serve a population of approximately 40,000. However, staffing isn't based on population. Staffing is based on needs assessment based off of call volume and number of incidents. So you could have a town, and sometimes incidents are paralleled to population. However, I don't want the assumption that if a town was onboarded into the regional that had a high call volume, that they would be stuck with 4 dispatchers. There's a great possibility if we onboard different towns, that's why we do the feasibility study, that we would increase staffing appropriately, using some formulations and some needs assessments based off of call volume to make sure that we have adequate staffing. So yes, you have 1 per 5,000 in Manchester. We currently have 4 for 40,000, but that's based off of thorough analysis for the number of incidents that the fire and police are reporting to, as well as the number of 911 calls that are incoming for our current 5 towns. So I just wanted to clarify that point. And as far as the second part, it seems like that was some sort of a swatting or a spoofing incident, which have occurred as of late across many of our towns. We would handle it the exact same way that Manchester PSAP would do. If we receive a 911 call in with a phone number, we call it back. If nobody answers, we still let the police know. And then it's the police department's call on how they respond, whether they decide to do a welfare check, whether they decide to follow up in another fashion. If they have us continue to call, we would handle it in the same type of fashion. We always call back 911 calls. We get a lot of calls in that are sometimes accidental dials or what's called an abandon. People call, they hang up, which you should never do, by the way. You should stay on the line and just say that you accidentally dialed, because we do always call back every 911 call at least twice. We often will run traces if we don't reach people, if it's a cell phone call and not a landline call. If it comes in as a landline call from a home, it's attached to an alley and it's attached to a location. It's attached to an address, and we would let responders know always. So I hope that helped answer that question as well.
Okay, so I would also like to comment that Allison's pointing out that there are 4 people on the shift on this sheet, but it says 4+. There is a supervisor on every shift in addition to the 4 dispatchers. On the graveyard shift, there are 3 dispatchers and a supervisor, and that supervisor can jump in to help if there are more calls that are needing to be responded to.
That is correct.
Okay. So I've got 2 people who have already asked questions. I'm going to take down this screen share, and if we need to come back to it, I'm happy to put it back up. But I want to make sure that we're getting to all the different participants that are here that want to ask questions. Now, the 2 people who have already asked questions, I have 2 other people who are now in the queue, And I'm going to call on them first and then come back to you. So the first would be Mary Foley. Could you please identify yourself with your full name and your street address?
Sure. Hi, Jeff. Thanks. Mary Foley, 1 Pulaski Drive. My 2 questions are, there was a question that was asked earlier that hadn't been answered. So I want to piggyback on that of the Board of Selectmen going to visit our dispatch and kind of ask what their observations were and how that is swaying any thoughts or decisions. And then my next one, I apologize if it's already been addressed at a prior meeting, but what is the state saying once the quote free period ends? What would the potential cost be to the town? And I know it's hard to project if it's years out, but there's got to be some sort of range.
Okay.
Thank you.
I know that that several of the selectmen went to observe our dispatch operations. I know that I went with Becky one day during the daytime, and we got a tour of dispatch and other aspects of the station that were related to dispatch. And you asked, how does that impact the people who went? How does it impact their thinking about this decision? It helped me to physically see what the dispatch situation was, but in terms of the overall decision, there's so many factors that go into this decision that I don't want to highlight any particular one from that visit personally. If there's any other selectman who visited who wants to talk about how that visit might have impacted their perception of dispatch in Manchester, I'm happy to have you respond to that question. Okay, so Mary, there was a second part to what you just asked, and I wanted to make sure that I responded to the impact of visiting. It was wonderful to see the setup that was there. Personally see it. I've been in and out of the police station on other matters, but this is the first time that I had a chance to sit down and talk with one of the dispatch, not sit down, but stand in a very small space and talk with Chief Fitzgerald and one of the dispatchers. Mary, can you ask your second question again?
Sure. It was just asking that once the free period with the state is over, so whether it's 10 years out or another time frame, what's the predicted amount? I know you're not going to get exact number, but I'm assuming there's a range, there's at least a ballpark of what it would cost the town.
Okay, I'd like to start the response to this, and then if Allison wants to add to it or Greg wants to add to it, but I'd like to start because this has been a very frequently asked question. What happens afterwards? When the shoe falls and we have to start paying for all these dispatch services, and that's 10 years out. We don't know what's going to happen with our own dispatch services 10 years out. We don't know in terms of the expansion of staff, the expansion of need. I mean, we can make some projections about it, but to know exactly what the cost of the services are going to be 10 years out is really hard to do. There's a lot of factors that go into what that cost might be, including differences in the way that dispatch services are done, the equipment that's needed, and the software and personnel that's needed. So it's kind of a tough question to lay on the regional center alone to answer. Greg, if you want to comment on what I just said, and then we can turn it over to Allison.
I'm sure I can add a little bit in terms of just a way to think about this. So we heard Allison comment earlier this evening that the intent is to do a second contract that would replicate the first, and they're striving to keep that price at zero, but there are no guarantees. So another way to think of it is what was the charge when the sheriff's office was running the regional center. So they were charging on a per capita basis. Their charge was about $16 and change per capita. That compares to our current cost. So that's a few years old. So even if you increase it to $20 a head, we're currently paying a little over $60 a head for our service. So obviously there's economies of scale when you have a regional center. So if indeed, 10 years out that the no-cost service is no longer possible, I think it'll be similar in terms of the relative cost per capita. So I think even if there is a charge, I think you can pretty much count on savings. But dollars aren't the only thing that's going into this decision, but people focus on the dollars a lot. So I think while there are no guarantees, I think that we can feel fairly confident that, putting other factors aside, on a cost basis, you pretty much are guaranteed you're going to be saving money when you're involved with a regional facility versus the cost of going on our own.
Allison, do you want to add any comments to that?
Sure. Those were both very fine answers. I can also state that as most of you know, part of our process for onboarding or entertaining onboarding new towns and cities is to do a feasibility study. So if Manchester were to give us a letter of intent, we would do a thorough feasibility study based on the specifics of what it would cost us to bring Manchester into our operation. So once we conducted that feasibility study, that would give you a bit of an idea of what it would cost the regional center to dispatch for Manchester versus what it would cost Manchester to dispatch for Manchester. And that might help you estimate, I guess, outside of the 10 years. I do want to reiterate again, however, that is the governor's and EOP's and the state's intent to make as many regionalized centers as possible. There are now over 32 different regionals and recs across the state of Massachusetts. Not a lot of them in our area, but there are a few popping up because towns and cities are seeing the benefits of working collaboratively, both for operational needs, not just financial needs. So a lot of these towns and communities are seeing cost savings as opposed to standalone. So that's just another bit of information to consider. However, I will state that without saying 100% guarantee that it is the state's intent for the onboarding of the next within our ability, within our budget, and we're well under our budget of what we can handle at the regional center currently, to keep those towns and cities at a zero cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Mary, does that respond to the questions that you had?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, Sandy.
Great, thank you. Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. This is probably a question for Allison. Trying to understand the amount of attention a small town will get vis-a-vis how large your regional center can grow. So here's a scenario. There's a gas explosion in one of the larger towns that you service. And, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that once someone gets on 911, you're supposed, I think legally you have to keep them online until you get them the help or the information that they need. And then, like, say one of the bigger towns has a big event, whether it be a gas explosion, a big accident, or, you know, anything like that, and then someone is having a heart attack in Manchester by the Sea. How do you balance the calls so that a smaller entity will get just as much attention versus a larger entity? How do your ratios work where you understand that you're going to have to build out the 4+ to 6+ to 10+ people to serve the dispatch? And do you have an on-call force in case of large emergencies? Because now you're talking about, like, maybe there might be something in Manchester where we need to boil over and, you know, you're putting stress on the dispatchers, but the likelihood of some of these other towns needing that kind of bigger effort, that might then, like, mean that the ongoing support for some of the smaller locations, they might get some either hesitation in support, or, you know, I know you're doing everything that you can, it's not on purpose, but just sort of wanting to understand how that works.
Thank you, Sandy, for your question.
May I answer? Good.
Go
Sure,
ahead.
that's an excellent question. I also just want to also state that my deputy director, Chris Ryan, is also on this call. So if the chair, if it's okay, after I answer, if there's some additional operational things he can fill in specifically, if it would be okay if he speaks as well.
That's fine.
Okay, great. So you're correct, Sandy. Those kind of incidents do happen, right? It's kind of like Murphy's Law. Usually it's either quiet or all the phones are ringing. And so we staff according to the fact that we have pods. We have a fire pod, we have a police pod, and we have call takers, so that we have the towns sort of assigned each shift to their own dispatcher for that shift. So for example, right now we have our largest town that we service is a city. It's the city of Amesbury, and the smallest town that we service is Essex. Essex will have their police and fire dispatcher for the evening, and Amesbury would have theirs. And so there's always a balance of service with an attention to all of the towns through our staffing. And I think your question was about if somebody had a large scale incident. Yes, we absolutely have on-call staff available. In fact, we've had to utilize that before, because in addition to the regional center, we also have a wireless center which is a separate operation. I don't want to confuse people by it, but the Merrimack Valley explosions, for example, now we don't dispatch for Lawrence, so we were certainly not taking the landline calls or dispatching Lawrence, but we were taking a lot of cell phone calls that evening. And that was one of the examples where you would call in everybody, we would send out a page, an SOS, and bring everyone in, including myself. We're on the phones and taking calls. So we definitely have continuity of operations and emergency operation plans in place for large scale incidents, unexpected ones. We often staff accordingly if we know there's going to be predicted events. If the Topsfield Fair is coming up, they're one of our towns. We know there's going to be a lot of things going on. So we have upstaffed and have tactical dispatch specifically for that, so that we still have our regular dispatch force dealing with Essex and Wenham and Amesbury and Middleton to make sure that they still get the attention they need. One of the benefits of a regional and having multiple dispatchers and not a single dispatcher is that you are able to handle multiple things at once. So for example, if you have a fire that's going on and your fire dispatcher for Manchester out of the regional is handling that, but perhaps someone calls in from 911 from Manchester having a heart attack on the other side of town, they're still going to get answered immediately by one of the other backup dispatchers, because they're all cross-trained to back each other up. So that's the beauty of the interoperability and the cross-training and the backup of having multiple call takers and dispatchers on each shift, so that you can handle those calls, whether they be from the disparate 5 towns that we handle, or even if they come from the one town, because usually that's how things happen, unfortunately, is everything sort of, when it rains, it pours. So that's a very broad answer. Chris, I don't know if you want to get into something more operationally specific to help answer Sandy's question.
Sure. Just one thing I wanted to point out, Allison. Certainly, if we had some sort of a major incident like that, we would actually, let's say that dispatcher was handling 2 different fire departments. we would pull them off and have them dedicated to that specific event. And then the other staff would take on the other town. So they wouldn't, like that particular individual handling the event is not going to be tasked with handling 911 calls. They're dedicated to being like a tactical dispatcher for that police or fire event.
Okay, so just for clarity, at the very beginning, you mentioned something about having someone assigned for a town. So if Manchester joins, are you automatically adding a dispatcher so you have that net one guaranteed dispatch?
No, what I meant is that each shift, when our dispatchers come in, they're assigned, you're going to work Manchester Fire and Essex Police tonight. And then another dispatcher would be, you're going to work this and this. They have their assignments for each shift that they're dedicated. And so then they can chat and let the officers or the firefighters know that they're on for the night, that's what I meant.
Okay, so that if there is some large event going on in Amesbury, regardless, if like you're down to only one dispatcher, someone is going to answer that phone for Manchester, regardless if there's like a huge, you're not mandated to stay on and go to whoever calls first.
No, so I'm a little confused about the mandated for who calls first, but the way calls come in, we have it's called an ACD system, so that the call will ring at each dispatcher. So if one dispatcher is busy and can't answer the phone because they're, like Chris said, they've been isolated for a specific incident, that call automatically is picked up by the next dispatcher. So there's reinforcement and redundancy built in to not only just the system, the calling, the next gen 911 system by the state, but with our staff, and they're prepared and they work together cohesively to back each other up. That's the beauty of having a supervisor, a trained long-term dispatcher on each shift that does that, makes those judgment calls. If Amesbury's having an incident, they isolate that dispatcher out, they reassign and reallocate as necessary, or they themselves, who are trained dispatchers, jump in and take the extra town or whatever that we had to isolate, say for the Amesbury incident. So there's backup already built within the shift. And then if it really needs to be, the supervisor contacts Chris, myself, our operations manager, our training and quality assurance manager, all four of us, as well as the on-call dispatchers if they needed to come in to reinforce.
Okay.
Does that make more sense?
Okay,
Yeah, that helps a bit. Thank you.
thank you, Sandy.
And I'm sorry, just one more thing. There is, without getting too into specifics, but there is a way that you're allowed to triage and best effort calls. I'm not saying you don't answer 911 calls. We answer every 911 call, but there is different priorities of calls and how you handle them and process them. And your current PSAP does that as well. So.
Great.
You get a grade from both Sandy and her dog. Okay. Don, you had another question.
Thank you. This relates, Jeff, to a reference you made to police reform law, and also the wise statement that we don't know 10 years out really what things are going to look like. So I have one question for you and Chief Fitzgerald on this, and then a follow-up question on that to Chief Fitzgerald. We've, of course, had massive nationwide police reform laws related to the terrible violence and theft in major cities like Seattle and Minneapolis last year, and major attacks on the credibility of people handling the situations and things that restrict their ability to deal with situations. And I don't know the details, Jeff, of the police reform law that you're referring to, but I assume that it and others, which I assume Chief Fitzgerald would be well aware of, have to some extent significantly downgraded the stature and the status of police in the eyes of many people. And
Don, hold on a second. I don't want to turn this into a discussion about police reform.
all right, let me tighten.
And what
I'll tighten it up then to the dispatch thing. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Criticism accepted. So my question to you and Chief Fitzgerald is, particularly to you, Chief Fitzgerald, do you feel that having the dispatcher local, as opposed to more remote, including Middleton, makes for better coordination between the dispatcher and the police force, and makes overall, over the period of time, and this is a judgment call of yours personally, for a more efficient and effective use of the police resources to create a safe environment and an efficiently safe environment?
Okay, I would like to comment that, and I want Chief Fitzgerald to respond to this, but I also want Chief Cleary to respond to this. We're talking about public safety dispatch in Manchester by the Sea, and public safety involves emergency medical services, involves fire services, involves police services across the board. So both chiefs are responsible for this. So let's take it from there. You're asking whether the chiefs feel that having dispatch local is a better service.
Well, I know that there's been a polite difference of opinion on this issue between the two chiefs, which is absolutely fine. So I was simply interested in knowing whether Chief Fitzgerald personally particularly thought that having the police function local was important for the optimal functioning of the police in this town. That would be my question. And I certainly respect Chief Cleary's opinion, but also he had also expressed the other opinion that he suggested that it was getting a bit harder to.
Let's let them respond to your question. Okay.
Let's do that.
Thank you. Chief Fitzgerald.
So locally, we have 3 full-time dispatchers, and they're pretty much trained to the same level as the dispatchers in regional, I assume. They all have emergency medical dispatch. They're trained with our current provider, ABCO, which I believe is similar to regional. One good thing is, and 2 out of our 3 full-time dispatchers are also trained as reserve police officers. So when someone comes into the station with a police issue, rather than having an officer return from patrol, they are able to handle that situation directly when someone walks in. If it's a situation where a report or a follow-up is needed, then that's when we would call someone in off the road. But the training aspect of it is pretty similar. However, like I said, 2 of our full-time dispatchers are reserve officer trained. And when we cover the other shifts with part-time people, most of the time, I would say about 90% of the time, those are covered with reserve officers that are trained as 911 dispatchers.
With all due respect, I don't hear your personal opinion as to whether you think the local regional people overall over a period of years would do a better job.
Mr. Schwartz, I would like you to wait and let's hear from both chiefs. You asked a question about what the services might be locally and how they work and whether they function better locally. So let's hear from Chief Cleary as well. Chief Fitzgerald, did you want to follow up any further on that?
Well, I do have a personal opinion. I've been a resident for my entire life, and I'm going to be a resident, when I'm long gone from this position. And I do feel with the police reform and everything, the anti-sentiment against police, that we need to keep some service local and, have that personal touch when people come in through the door. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
From the fire side, I'm trying to focus primarily on operationally. Having been a dispatcher, I know how hard it is when you're the only one there and there are phones ringing and radios on the police side squawking and radios on the fire side squawking, and things you have to look up on the computer, different and simultaneous calls. It's a lot for one person to handle, and it's very easily to get overwhelmed. So I'm looking at it more as less than local versus regional, as opposed to the number of dispatchers in there and the number of functions that are able to be handled, so that calls aren't missed. So the dispatcher isn't forced to prioritize fire over police or police over fire, given that we go to a lot of simultaneous calls together. Local knowledge has a place, but technology can fill in where local knowledge isn't there with respect to the computer-aided dispatch and how the data is put into the computer. And I know that since the dispatch is in the police station, there's a closer working relationship for most of the fire department. The degree that we know people is a voice over the radio, whether that voice is here in Manchester or it's in Middleton. It doesn't have as big an effect. It's all about getting the information quickly, getting the proper information and responding. I do know that it hasn't been the practice in the past per se for the local dispatchers to do ride-alongs in the fire station or come and see what our daily shifts are. My understanding is the regional center does that. They send their people out to ride with both police officers and the fire units. So they do get a local sense of what's going on in the community and the demographics and the different types of particular locations. So again, I'm looking at the level of service. The higher the level of service that can be provided to us, the better, faster service we're able to deliver to the community. And I'm basing it just on those factual elements.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Dawn, I'm going to move on to Mike. Thank you for your question. Mike, I'm gonna butcher it, Mike. You got to help me. Ross Marine.
Can you hear me okay, Jeff?
That's very clear. Thank you, Mike.
It's Ross Marin, by the way.
Ross Marin. I want to
Yes.
say Ross. Yeah.
That's fine. I have a broad question. I'm not sure if it's a pain in the butt question or not. This is coming up now. Is there a reason that a decision, is it required imminently a decision on this? And I'm asking it for a different reason. Can this be put to a town vote? Because it appears to be one of these things that are, there's a lot of groundswell on this, and you realize that too. What's the timing? Can it be put to a town vote? That's it. That's my question.
Okay. The short answer to your question is that this is a operational decision about the town. It's not, it's a decision that lies with the Board of Selectmen. And the Board of Selectmen is responsible for making this decision. We've taken a lot of input from the public. We've also taken a look at a lot of factors that are involved with dispatch, public safety dispatch. We've looked at both the local dispatch center. We've toured the local dispatch center. We've toured the regional dispatch center. We've looked at the numbers. This is a decision of the Board of Selectmen. And it's not that it's being rushed. God knows it hasn't been rushed. This has been something that has been before the town off and on for, Eli, help me out here, 15 years?
In one way or another, at least 10, more than that. Officially, we started looking into it in a very hard manner, in an organized manner, probably about 9 years ago for the
Okay.
last pass at the rec. But it's been a very long time.
That's my understanding. So this is not a rushed decision by any means. But it's time to make a decision and to see whether we can supplement the actual services that we get from police and fire with money that can be saved by going to regional dispatch. That's really the question that's before the Board of Selectmen. And it's not just a money question. We're aware of the fact that there are people involved. We're aware of the fact that there's a sense that having people who are local, and I want to be clear that the dispatchers in our town work really hard. The 3 full-time dispatchers in our town are not residents of this town. They work very hard at their jobs. They learn about the job. They certainly learn by being in the police station a lot about the police. And to some extent, they learn about the fire department. That's something that both chiefs are trying to address together in terms of our local dispatch. But this is not a rush decision, but it's a weighted decision to take a look at, is this a direction that we could go in that would help us to supplement the calls that we've had from both departments to expand positions.
Can you hear me, Jeff? I don't believe it was a rush decision. I was just asking if it was an imminent decision that had to be made on any timeline. And I guess my question was, I understand the Board of Selectmen can decide this, but I'm also asking, can this be put to a town vote?
I think I've answered your question. It's a Board of Selectmen decision.
Okay, so the Board of Selectmen is firm that they're going to decide this versus allowing the town to decide it. Okay.
The town does not decide other operational decisions within the town. Excuse me, the town meeting does not decide operational. What the town meeting does is it votes on budgets. And it votes on changes to the bylaws. It votes on a lot of different things. But as far as an operational decision like this, this is a decision of the town administrator and the Board of Selectmen. Okay, I'm going to move on to Sheila Hill. And Sheila, I'm going to ask you to unmute and identify yourself and your address, please. Still need you to unmute. Sheila, are you there? Whoops. Okay, on my end, Sheila, it appears that you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Okay, I'm not sure what just happened. You disappeared from the screen altogether. I think that your connection was cut.
So Jeff, while we're waiting perhaps for Sheila to log back in, just in terms of the timing for a decision, this is something that has been on again, off again for quite a number of years, but probably more critically is we're at a juncture where we really need to either reinvest fairly heavily into the in-house operations, or get those same better level of services through regional. So it does feel like a juncture, a critical juncture point for the town. We really need to either reinvest in the local dispatch operation, buy the upgraded software, look at probably adding a fourth dispatcher and maybe going to the 4-2 schedule. Or obviously we don't do that and then switch over to regional. So it feels like it's a juncture point. The time has come to make a final decision here, at least for the foreseeable future.
And that's a budgetary decision. If we are to stay at local dispatch, what's the costs and what are we going to be investing in and how are we going to do that and get it into the budget so that it can be voted on at town meeting?
Right. So we're about to enter the budgeting process for FY23. I know it feels kind of crazy to say that it's just September, but we start the budgeting process in October. I present a draft budget to the Finance Committee and Selectmen by early December. And then it gets fine-tuned through the winter and voters approve it in April.
There's also an important
Excuse me,
factor.
Jeff.
Yeah, Sheila, I'm glad I can hear you now, but let me just
Okay.
finish my comment. I'll come right
Sure.
back to you.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. There's also a timing factor in that this is not a switch, so that if the Board of Selectmen were to proceed to vote to ask North Shore 911, the regional center, to enter into a feasibility study with us. The feasibility study takes a period of time. Following the feasibility study, if everything is clear between the parties, a contract is drawn up, and then it takes time to onboard the systems. So all of that takes time. And in my visit to Middleton, Allison, I think you told me that it was approximately, including the feasibility study and all the onboarding work that needs to happen, about a year. Is that accurate?
That's a decent estimate, yes.
Okay. All right. Sheila.
Thank
you're
you,
back.
Jeff. Thank you. I had to log out and come back in.
Okay.
Sheila Hill, 2 Running Ridge Row. I have a question and a comment. My question, Jeff, you just said in response to Mike's question about could we vote, you said we have received a lot of input from the public. Could you summarize that input?
It would take a long time to summarize it because there's been a variety of different opinions expressed and questions on points of information that have been asked. We have had lots of questions asked by the public, and we've tried to respond to those questions as they've come in. I don't want to go through every single email inquiry that we've received.
I'm not asking that. I'm asking for it to summarize the key themes in the input from residents.
I mean, certainly in broad brush strokes, there's a contingent of residents who feel very strongly to keep the local dispatch operation going. There's a group of residents who have opined that they like the idea of always having at least 2 dispatchers on and feel that the regional dispatch is a better way to provide that service. I think we've heard, the broad spectrum, and it's covered quite a gamut. I would venture to say that we probably have heard more, if I were to count them, probably it's weighted a bit more towards keeping it in-house. That's who we have heard from perhaps a little more.
I would like to add to that that questions that have been asked have sometimes involved misunderstanding or mistaken understanding of what the factors are, the facts are about these decisions that we're involved in. And that when people who have said, I'm kind of leaning towards keeping in-house, took a more careful look at some of the information that we provided them, they have come back to us and said, I was looking at it that way, but looking at that information, that's really helped me to understand the benefits of the regional center, and I would strongly urge us to go to the regional center. So some of it is based in information and the information that people have. And that's why we're doing this public forum and other things, to try and get the information out so that people are operating on the basis of the facts of
Information. You don't want people to have misinformation.
That's true.
Certainly understand that. But I hear between the lines that the majority, a greater majority, has expressed a wish to keep the dispatch local. Okay.
No.
Don't worry about it.
I want to clarify what I'm saying, which is I don't know what the majority of people in this town want. I don't know whether and there was a question about surveying the entire town about this. One of the reasons that we elect public representatives is to make decisions like this. And whenever we think about who's talking about this, I'm not going to go on the basis of popularity. I'm going to go on the basis of what makes the best sense for the needs of Manchester by the Sea for public safety services, in terms of 2 in, 2 out, at the fire department, in terms of coverage for the loss of reserve officers at the police department, and what makes the most sense in terms of dispatch services and how that works.
Got it.
So there's a lot of factors that come into this, and none of the selectmen are doing this on the basis of, oh, well, we received 10 emails in this in pro and 10 emails pro and 12 emails against. So we should probably go against.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. Now my comment. The history of this center that I think most all of us are aware, out of 13 communities that the center was designed to serve, it still only serves 5. In Manchester, we have probably less than 3 fires a year, or maybe that's the average. We don't know. I know that it's quite low. I think it's only appropriate that the town be able to prioritize how it wants to spend its tax money. And therefore, I would ask that you do allow a non-binding vote of the town. And I think really it could be just for the next 2 fiscal years. Of the 3 million that it would cost us, we're divided by the 3 million was a 5-year projection. So let's say we're talking about 600,000. Let's say it's going to cost us $1 million. Let's keep our gold standard services until this center demonstrates that it has the credibility to draw more than 5 communities out of 13. That's my comment. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Furlong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions are directed at Chief Cleary. Some of this may be a bit redundant. I think it would be fair to say that the Regional Dispatch Center could best be described as having had a checkered performance career. But I'm very interested in a town with on average 3 structural fires a year. The 2 in, 2 out number, which by the way has been bandied about for many years in a search to get more professional firefighters hired. What do our peer towns, Hamilton, Wenham, Essex, Rockport, do they meet that standard? I'm very curious how we measure up to them.
Okay, before Chief Cleary answers that question, I would like to comment that our fire service is not just a fire service. Our fire service is emergency medical services and fire. It's an ambulance service. There are ambulance services and there are life support ambulance services, which we have deemed to be what we need in Manchester. And so I don't want to limit this to, gosh, if there's only 3 fires, why are we spending all this money? Because it's not the case that that's what the services are that are fire services in the town. Go ahead, Chief Cleary.
Well, with your multi-part question, I don't know how the surrounding communities meet that or don't meet that. Rockport is all volunteer. And Essex is primarily call and volunteer with no full-time staffing. And Wenham has a few people on during the day and survives on call firefighters. I'm just concerned about my personnel. The 2 in, 2 out being bantered around, it is an NFPA standard, NFPA 1710, which is about fire safety. And all you need is 1 fire to severely injure or kill a firefighter. So it's not based on how many fires you have or you don't have. It's the national standard that we try to meet to provide the safest working environment for our firefighters. So in addition to meeting the 2 in, 2 out, a major motor vehicle accident overtaxes us. With 3 people on shift, we can handle a small fender bender with 1 patient. But if you had a major motor vehicle accident and you had people entrapped or the vehicle was on fire, we are operating with 3 outside of our capabilities. We're not able to perform rescues with not having 2 in, 2 out. So if we were to get to a structure fire and somebody's inside, we're not equipped to go in and save them. So it's not about our fire safety, it's about the service we can provide to the townspeople and our ability to rescue people in a house fire. And with respect to standards, we're one of few we have everybody on our staff minus 2 senior people are all paramedics. And 95% of the time, 99% of the time, that ambulance goes out the door as an ALS, advanced life support ambulance with 2 paramedics. Very few services, even those that rely on private services, will get 2 paramedics on a call. And the 2 in, 2 out that works on fires allows us 2 people to transport a patient to the hospital and leaves 2 people in quarters to respond to any other emergency, whether it be a medical emergency or a fire emergency. So the staffing across the board helps us to provide a better service.
Okay, thank you for your question, Mr. Furlong. Mr. Bowling.
I just wanted to make a kind of personal observation about the 2 in, 2 out question. And something that I've found challenging as part of this process over the years. We talk about 2 in, 2 out and whether or not it's really necessary. And as it's been pointed out, it's a national standard. And it is true that not every community meets that standard, but it is also pretty well recognized that it's the standard that represents that which will protect, offers a clear protection for our firefighters. So you sometimes put themselves at risk for us, oftentimes do. And the challenge, the little moral challenge that I have is this. So the firefighters can ignore the 2 in, 2 out requirement. So if they go up to a place that's on fire and they have good reason to believe that there are people in jeopardy on the inside of that building, and they only have 2 people there, they will enter that building at risk to themselves. So, and that's just going to be their job. So when we make the decision to structure our emergency forces so that they are going to be put in that position, we need to understand that we are saying, yeah, okay, it is true, they may have to do that, and we are sanctioning it with our choice of budgetary structure. I find that to be a difficult problem to wrestle with. And I just wanted to make sure that people understood that yeah, there's a lot of budget in there, but we're also making decisions about the safety of our emergency services personnel. And it can be a little bit of a challenging moral lift.
Thank you, Eli. Allison, you got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I actually have to jump off to attend another commitment. So I didn't want to jump out without saying thank you and letting you know that Chris Ryan, my deputy director, is still on the call. And also I am happy to field any additional questions, whether you want to visit our center or give us a call. I know I've met and spoken with a few of you, but I do apologize, but I do have to run this evening, but I am reachable and you have my contact information. Thank you so much.
Allison, thank you very much for your participation and the clear answers that you gave to the questions that you took. So
Thank you, and don't hesitate to reach out.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Katie Elwell. Katie, the chair recognizes you as one of the dispatchers that is currently working at the police station on behalf of all the residents of our town, and we thank you for your service. Would you please ask your question or make your comment?
I don't so much have a question. I just have a little brief thing I'd like to read on behalf of the dispatchers, if that's okay.
As long as it is addressing the guidelines that I gave to the rep who got in touch with me.
Yeah,
Okay.
we believe it does. It's just pretty factual instead of being
Okay.
personal. So,
Okay, thank you.
All right, so good evening and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this important matter concerning public safety dispatch operations for Manchester by the Sea. My name's Katie Elwell. I'm one of the 3 full-time Manchester by the Sea public safety dispatchers. I've been a dispatcher for Manchester for 11 years, and I'm proud of the work that I do as our community's first responder, as well as the other 2 full-time dispatchers. The public safety dispatch team serves a vital role in providing 24/7, 365 emergency response and public safety to residents, visitors, and businesses alike in town. We dispatch calls not only for the fire and police departments, but also for the harbor master, animal control, and after hours for the DPW. We are also the public face of the police department and are trained to assist any visitors that come into the police station for emergency and non-emergency situations. We respond to issues big and small. On top of our regular duties responding to emergencies, we are often called with questions about what's going on in town. Simple questions such as parade and fireworks start times, power outages, parking issues, beach access, and the list goes on. No matter what the issue someone calls about, our dispatch team is trained and willing to assist the public. The men and women who make up the full-time public safety dispatch team are first and foremost concerned about the well-being of the residents we serve and the safety of our police, fire, and EMS personnel we work side by side with to keep our community safe. Our objections to regionalization have always been about putting the needs of the community we serve first. We do not believe that our community will achieve better services by joining an unproven and untested regional center with towns with which Manchester has minimal connections to. We perform services and take calls for residents that faceless outside dispatchers are simply not equipped to answer. Regionalization has already been rejected by the town, most recently in 2015. The town has wisely decided to invest in upgrades and improvements to the Public Safety Dispatch Operations Center to allow for faster and more accurate responses to calls coming into the center. The police, fire, and DPW departments are undergoing extensive upgrades to the radio systems, and new dispatch consoles have already been installed. Yes, there's always still work to be done. Our records management system is outdated and obsolete, and only a handful of other communities in the Commonwealth use the same system, which is well past its usable lifespan. Hold on, I'm sorry. Even so, Manchester by the Sea has a dispatch operation that would make any community proud, and we're in the process of making it even better. The town has invested millions in the new middle school, the elementary school, and other worthwhile projects in town, but why are we not similarly investing in our public safety? The cost savings presented show an alleged operational savings, but fails to take into account the added costs and salaries and benefits for hiring new employees or diverting current duties to existing personnel to staff the police station lobby. State E911 grants, which the town currently receives, are dependent upon having your in-house dispatch unit. Grant funds can be applied to departmental upgrades, including those sought by the fire chief to improve his operations. A move to a regional model would make the town ineligible for those grants, reducing and negatively impacting the department's operating budget. The fire chief also reported an equipment savings by joining a regional center. There are significant maintenance and training costs for both the police and fire departments associated with free equipment. Equipment costs, radios, computers, software, and consoles are currently shared across a number of different town departments, police, fire, schools, and public works, and must be maintained and operational for all. Most importantly, if the town forfeits its public safety access point to a regional center, which is known as the PSAP, as everybody's been talking about, there's no turning back. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to regain the access point to bring dispatch back in-house.
Okay, stop.
Yep.
How much more do you have to say? Because
Maybe
I
like,
expected that you would make some comments, but this is a lot more than I expected.
okay, I probably have like a minute, maybe a minute and a half left. That's it.
Okay.
Like a paragraph and a half.
Go ahead.
Okay. The town of Ipswich, which is pretty local to us, is also going through a similar situation with deciding to regionalize or not. Their residents are very adamant about keeping it in-house and keeping the personal touch, just like a lot of residents have given us feedback. Our dispatch team knows Manchester by the Sea in and out, and in emergencies, seconds can mean the difference between life and death. There's an assumption that there'll be a personnel dedicated to responding to calls from Manchester by the Sea at the regional center at all times, but it's not the case. At the regional center, the dispatchers would be employees of the center, and they can be deployed any way the center sees fit. Currently, the police and fire chiefs are both able to set their policies, procedures, and protocols for the public safety dispatchers without having to answer to state bureaucrats as well as chiefs and town managers from other communities. A decision to move to a regional model would also,
Okay,
excuse me, sorry. I
Katie,
have just my
Katie?
closing statement. And that's it.
go ahead.
In closing, our public safety dispatchers are and always have been 100% dedicated to the residents, visitors, and public safety operations in Manchester by the Sea. Thank you for your time.
Okay. There's a lot there, and it's hard to break it all down and respond to the comments that you just made. I have a question for you. Have you ever toured the regional center?
I have been there. I've done trainings there. I've
Have you-
seen the different rooms. Yep.
It's not just seeing the rooms. Have you seen the operations and how they operate?
No.
Okay. Because you made a lot of comments about how regional center operates, and not all of them, from my observations and the information that I received when I went to the center, coincide with what I learned.
Okay.
The issue of harbor master, animal control, DPW, these are negotiable issues in the onboarding process in terms of how those calls get handled. And in fact, when it comes to things like DPW, my understanding is that there's an on-call DPW person every day and every night, on the weekends, et cetera. And that's still the case if the call goes to the regional center and they get in touch with the on-call person.
Right. Our statement
Well,
was more
no,
of just a-
I listened to you, and I don't want you to interrupt me for a moment.
Okay.
Because I want to just correct some things that you've posited in your statement. The other areas, harbor master and animal control, are also negotiable within the feasibility study and the contract that's drawn up. So, and I'm not saying, okay, that makes regional better. I'm just saying, when you contrast it that way, it sounds like none of those services are available through the regional center, and they are. At least this is what we've been told, and this is what our understanding is from the contracting process. What you said about PSAP recovery is true, that when if Manchester were to join the regional center, we would give up our local license for a public safety access point. And that's challenging to recover, but the state of Massachusetts is making that challenging because they want to see regional operations across the entire state. So if Manchester were to leave the regional center after the contract, a PSAP could be recovered through regionalization or regional agreement with another town that had an existing PSAP. So it's not impossible to recover PSAP services, but it would require being in a regional agreement with another town, probably in our area. There are several other things that you said, but I would leave it to members of the board to respond, or either of the two chiefs, or Mr. Fetterspiel. Becky, do you want to say something to this? Sean, I recognize your hand is up and I will recognize you in a moment, but Becky's on the board and she can respond to some of the things that she's talking about.
Thank you, Jeff. Katie, first of all, thank you all very much. The dispatch does a wonderful job and we're fortunate to have you all. Are you currently working right now?
Yes.
So when the call came in a moment ago and you were talking to us, somebody else had to come in to answer that?
Yep.
So there are always two of you on typically?
That's one of the other full-time dispatchers who's here to listen to the meeting as well.
Is he working right now?
Mm-hmm.
So there are two dispatchers being paid for on duty at this point.
No, ma'am, he's working the road. He's a reserve officer as well.
So you were the dispatcher and the call came in and you didn't answer it because you were talking to us.
Mm-hmm. Because we had a discussion to, when he wants to talk, I will cover. When I want to talk, he would cover.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jeff, I actually have one other question about that. Well, two. So as the reserve officer, is he typically supposed to be out on the road at this time?
Yes.
You need to ask that question of Chief Fitzgerald.
No, excuse me.
And I have two, then that question and the other question for Chief Fitzgerald.
You're muted, Todd. Todd, you're muted.
Yes, he's working the road tonight as on another shift as a reserve police officer, but we allowed him to come in and sit on this meeting since it, obviously affects his union and his full-time position.
Okay, so in other words, you were completely aware that the working dispatcher and the working reserve officer would be in at the same time right now during this meeting.
That is correct. And we have someone else out on the road covering the shift.
Is that someone being paid time and a half then?
No, that's a full-time officer on his regular shift.
Oh, so we have two out, a full-time and a reserve?
We
at
have
the
a
same
full-time
time?
officer. We have two on a shift. We have a full-time officer by contract. We have to have one full-time bargaining unit member on at all times, which he's on duty and his regular shift. And we have one reserve officer who's covering a vacancy tonight, and that is Officer Mullins.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And sorry if I digressed on that. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chief.
Okay. Greg, is there anything that you want to respond to in what Katie said?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I think, obviously this is all part of the pros and cons. There are decisions to be made. I think, to me, it comes down to the issue of those larger incidents and providing a dedicated dispatcher to that larger incident. I think, Katie and Sean and the others, they are extremely busy when that larger incident is happening and other calls are coming in. We try to bring in that backup second dispatcher, but it's not instantaneous. It's going to take 5, 10, 20 minutes before that second dispatcher can provide that kind of relief. So to me, that's the crux of this debate. And we could solve it by doubling our own staffing. That's an expensive fix, but it is an option. Or we could solve it by going to the regional center and using those dollars to do other things. Whether that be a combination of receptionists and other public safety staff, or give it back to the taxpayers. I mean, there's different options, but the crux of the matter here, in my mind, is how do we best provide the dispatching services when there are multiple incidents happening, or when there's just one large incident and the regular calls are still coming in. And God bless our dispatchers. They have somehow managed that, but it's not an ideal situation.
Okay, Sean, I'm a little hesitant here because Katie's statement was very broad and very thorough. But I'm going to give you some time to speak. I may not give you as much time as Katie had, but I'm going to give you some time to speak. So go ahead.
No, that's understandable. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. I appreciate you overcoming the hesitancy of it. As you know, I'm Sean Mullins. I'm a reserve police officer here. I'm the day shift dispatcher. There's 3 of us, only 2 of us were allowed to speak tonight. This decision impacts not only myself, my colleagues, but you, the general public, members of the board included. It's a decision that should not be taken as lightly as it appears to be taken. Speaking factually, only 2 members of the board have come to tour our facility, while based off of the dialogue tonight, it appears that all have gone to the regional center. It appears as if a decision has already been made. Costs are being cited as a concern. We talk about how it's a state budget, that's what plays into dispatch being free for 10 years. If we look at the Quinn bill, historically involved in state budgets related to police, that disappeared. It left towns, municipalities on the hook to pick up the budget. As we've talked about operationally, being here, it allows our chiefs, both police and fire, to determine what our best strategy is moving forward. Manchester is not a cookie cutter community. We have our own uniqueness. We need to address not only this situation moving forward if we're going to stay in-house or eventually move, but we need to also address the state of how we got to this underinvestment. It's concerning that we've been doing so much with so little for so long. I'm going to keep it short for you. In closing, it seems like we're just really concerned nickel and dime costs. That shouldn't be the goal of public safety. It should be providing the best services for the members of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I want to reiterate that in the comments that we've made so far about the money that would be savings from going to regional dispatch, that money will be invested. At least it's the intent of this board and the town administrator to invest it in public safety. Eli.
So I just wanted to correct one bit of information there. So I did not in this past year go to see the Manchester Dispatch Center. That's because the last time that we went through this process, I was very much in the center of it all. And it was in the last round that I went and I looked in great detail at the Manchester Dispatch Center and the rec. And I am fully aware of the technical capabilities, the staffing, and the technical features of both the rec and the Manchester Dispatch Centers. So no, I didn't go there this time, but trust me, I am fully aware of what we do and how we do it. And as for taking this decision lightly, God, we've been going back and forth over this for at least 9 years, more. And there's an enormous amount of effort that has gone into this. There's nothing light about it. It's been a long haul.
leave the video off. I've got it on. I guess everybody's been muted actually right now. Yeah, probably are. Yeah. It was on.
Martha, I'm going to have to ask you to mute yourself because
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
if I mute you, it just comes up with a message that says ask you to unmute. Thank you. I'm sorry, I lost the end of Eli's comment.
I think I was done.
Okay. Chief Clary.
I have a question, and I don't know if it's procedural that I could ask Sean and Katie a question based on.
Why don't you ask the question of the chair and we'll decide whether we're going to go beyond.
My question is, with the dispatchers being the sole dispatchers, would they or would they not prefer to have a second dispatcher with them at all times on all shifts? Because that hasn't been spoken and that hasn't been asked of them, and they haven't presented that. But I think that would affect them the most, regardless of whether it's 2 dispatchers here or we're talking multiple dispatchers at the regional. Thank you.
Sean, do you want to respond to that question?
Thank you for the opportunity. Obviously, you see I'm in uniform. I'm completely comfortable working the road with 1 dispatcher. We handle all issues with no problems. If I took this off, put on my regular civilian clothes, and I was on the desk, I would say the exact same thing. I'm comfortable working, whether it be a police, fire, or medical call. And again, and it goes back to the budgetary issue, that if we have proper staffing and there's extra people around, just about all members of the police department are trained to be dispatchers. They all maintain their dispatch certifications, EMD certifications, etc. Help is there at a moment's notice if needed. But getting to the core of the question, I'm comfortable with the current working conditions of 1 dispatcher on.
Okay, thank you. Becky.
I would just like to reiterate that, and I keep hearing that it's a quick decision and it's based on budget. It's driven by what's best for best safety for the town, and this has been said, this is not being taken lightly. And I just wanted to reiterate those 2 points. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay. We've been going at this for 2.5 hours. I will take Mark B, but I want to bring this to close. Mark, could you please identify yourself, first name, last name, and your street?
Yes, good evening. Thank you. My name is Mark Bruno, 7 Forest Lane in Manchester. Sort of with the discussions about the number of people that the board has talked to and the various conversations that you have had, has anybody actually spoken to any of the firefighters and police officers on the street in any of the communities that are currently served by REC to determine pros, cons, what's improved, what still needs improvement with the way that they do their job, their ability to do their jobs, and the way they can provide the service to the communities? You have a very important decision to make. I think every conversation needs to be happened, not just these administrative conversations. And the people of Manchester, I think they should know how this change will or won't affect how the fire department, police department can respond if needed.
So your question is, have members of the board spoken to, I'm not sure whether you're saying chiefs or
No, the actual people responding to calls, not just administrative conversations, but conversations with people who are actually doing the job.
I think
Has
I
that
think
conversation happened?
I think that the perspective that you're taking is one that's extremely, it's kind of an extreme position to talk to, because we would have to interview every firefighter and every police officer in the 5 communities to get the whole spectrum of opinion on how regional dispatch works for them. And I know that we could probably talk to just a sample of those, but I think that that's going to yield a perspective of that sample and not necessarily be of all the people who are working online. I understand what you're asking, but I think that you're putting it up against a straw man of just administrators. And, in that case, what we should do is we should have all of the police officers and all the fire officers in Manchester on this call and not have Chief Fitzgerald or Chief Cleary. Because those are the people who have to work with dispatch here in this town. So I think the question you're asking, or what you're requesting, is to be done diligently, is beyond the scope of any inquiry into this particular dispatch decision.
I'm just looking for the decision to be a well-rounded decision, that's all. Not to, I'm not looking to make things difficult.
Okay, and I understand your point. Thank you for your question. And any other board member wants to respond to that, I'm happy to have that happen.
Jeff?
John Round.
Yes, I might ask a question. I think that in an earlier forum, the chiefs did speak with chiefs from some of the other surrounding communities that were signed up with the regional service. I think Chief Cleary had spoken perhaps with the chief in Essex. I know they certainly know the chiefs in the other communities, and I think they did comment on that one way or the other. I can't remember all of the details of their comments, but they were, they in general were, things were going along okay with the relationships that they had. So I don't know if either of the other chiefs want to comment on what the other communities were, what the other communities' experience has been so far with their relationship with the regional operations.
I'm happy to speak to that. I talked to all the other chiefs that are in there. A lot of them had been in there since the inception and spoke of how things had improved and discussed the mechanisms that were in place to change things. Was everything 100% great? No. Did every department get exactly what they wanted? No, but they came to consensus on operating procedures and how they did it. And nobody raised any red flags. Nobody told me run away from it. Nobody on the fire side told me that it wasn't worth it or that it wasn't working. And I talked to the chiefs of all the communities that are currently there at the regional.
Todd, would you like to respond to John?
I did myself speak to a few chiefs. We're pretty close with the Essex chief and the Wenham chief, and they pretty much said, things have changed and things have improved. However, the former chief in Essex, I believe that was a staffing and a union issue. That's why they decided to move forward with the regional system. I did speak to another chief that's involved with it currently, and that's the Topsfield chief. And he did tell me that if he had it was a strictly funding issue, and if the town's basing it on funding, he doesn't feel like that would be the right decision to make. And if he had the available funds to reopen his own dispatch center back in his own community, then that's what he would do.
And have you spoken to Wenham, Amesbury, or Middleton?
No, I have not spoken to those chiefs. I do know that from a previous caller, it might have been Mr. Mark B. I'm not sure if that's the lieutenant on the Amesbury Fire Department, but apparently they are still having some sort of issues, but I've not spoken to the chiefs directly up there.
Okay. Susan Harrington.
Susan Harrington, 0 Woodhome Road. Thank you, first of all, to the Board of Selectmen and others who have worked so hard on this issue. As Selectwoman Becky Jakes mentioned, the best safety for the town is the essence of this whole issue. And for this reason, whether it costs the taxpayers, including myself, more or saves us money, I would really hope that the voters would have a chance to vote on this issue. Before you make your final decision, before you figure all your costs, which I understand is a very important issue, but I would hope the voters would be able to vote on this particular decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Becky.
I just wanted to ask, we've heard how many calls come in to the police department. Do we know of all the calls that come in to the dispatch, how many of those calls are for EMS and or fire?
So we did list those numbers in the FAQs that are on the website. I don't have that sheet in front of me, but we can certainly
pull
get
it
those
right
in.
up. Yeah, I was on the town website and I was trying to pull all that up, but I am not seeing that information on there at the moment. It's probably just me, but I will keep looking.
Let's see. I had it open. Yeah. So this is from the calendar year 2020. There were 455 ambulance calls. There were 12 fire calls. Those were active fire calls. There were 865 fire services. These are alarm inspections, false alarms, other permitting activity. There were 456 police crimes called in, 411 animal control calls, 107 motor vehicle accidents called in. And that particular year, 2020, there was 354 walk-ins to the station. And then there were approximately 11,500 sort of general informational inquiries. Basically 1 an hour, a little more than 1 an hour. And that could be police, fire, or DPW. A lot of general town information inquiries, as was mentioned.
It's a lot of work. Thank you.
Jeff, Lorena Iavani, may I make a comment or ask a question?
Go ahead, Lorraine. I understand you're on a phone and it's impossible to raise your hand on the phone. So
Right, I'm usually on the.
I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
speaking up. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This is a question I think you can decide, Jeff, for the deputy director. Cyber attacks are not unusual, and I know I've raised this concern. If the North Shore 911 wreck were to suffer a cyber attack, what's the plan with regard to ensuring that we have, continuation of services from Middlesex?
That's a very good question. I would also like the chiefs to respond to what's the plan for the Manchester by the Sea dispatch services if they were to be subject to a cyber attack. Chris, do you think that you can field that one?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess I would put this
And since Allison has left and she's the center director, could you introduce what your position is in the center?
Sure, I'm the deputy director for the North Shore Regional 911.
Thank you.
No problem. So as far as addressing the cyber attacks, I guess I'll take that as in two different prongs. One would be on the 911 system itself, which the answer would be the same exact setup for Manchester, because we are governed on a state 911 system. State 911 maintains that entire system. It's a closed network, so all of the 911 equipment basically doesn't touch the public facing internet. They have redundancy on redundancy built up so that there's 2 data centers in Massachusetts, and there's actually a 3rd data center, I think it's in Virginia, to handle the calls and route that. So that is pretty robust as far as being able to steer clear of any cyber attacks and whatnot. And like I said, there's no exposure to the internet. You can't, as a dispatcher on a 911 computer, you wouldn't be able to access a Google website, for example. And then as far as the other side that I would say would be on our CAD and dispatching system. So this is our, the regular computers that we use to dispatch out the, police and fire and EMS. That system is, we run virtual servers. So we have multiple servers where the data is stored, but it's also backed up and replicated on a daily basis. So that, should we suffer a cyber attack, we have the ability to be able to restore from that backup and go right back to the last restoration point. So I feel pretty confident that we're fairly well covered on that. In addition to that, we do have a robust firewall and networking system. We have a security company on retainer that handles all of the firewall networking issues. So we've blocked access from overseas, for example. There's restrictions on websites that can be visited, on like illegal websites, for example. This helps to mitigate or protect us from any losses on cyber attacks at our center.
So Chief Fitzgerald or Chief Cleary, do you want to talk about?
Yeah, we're pretty much set up the same way. Our in-house records management system is sort of a closed system. Our cruisers access it through a firewall system, similar to what the rec has. In regards to a cyber attack, we do have backup with the records management system, and it's backed up daily. We would be able to go back to the last time it was backed up if event we were had some sort of virus or attack. And with regards to our computer system or our internet access, I would have to refer that to Greg or Sandra Network, who's our IT provider.
Yeah, I definitely would have to refer to our IT provider. I am not your expert on our technology. And I do know that it has been a focus of theirs for the last couple of years, and they have been making significant upgrades, firewall and other cybersecurity measures and malware and that sort of thing.
Lorraine, does that respond to your question?
I believe so. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. Okay, Don, you've been up 3 times already. And unless this is a very specific question about a different area, I would ask that you refrain.
Not a question. It would be only if you allow it, because you have the authority to or not, to make a brief statement on the dispatch system. It would be a statement, not a question. And
I would prefer not to have a statement at this point. Through questions, we've answered a lot of the factual issues that are here. I know that there are some misconceptions that we tried to address. There's some important resources in terms of the information that's available to us tonight, both in terms of the people from our dispatch center as well as the regional dispatch center. But I would prefer not to have another statement.
Feel free to send it to me or someone else on the board and we can put it
Absolutely.
into.
no, I won't bother to do that. It would be about a 1-minute statement, but you have the authority not to want to have it. That's fine.
Don, we're asking that you send it to us. It'd be fine. We will review it.
I'm politely declining to send it to you. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other members of the public that wish to have an opportunity to speak? Any members of the board that want to make a comment or a question? John?
Jeff, if I may,
I'm good.
Okay. Becky?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming and attending tonight and just taking part in this. Thank you.
Okay. Ann?
From the beginning, and I also appreciate the time that everyone has put into this and their patience in dealing with everything. I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Ann. Eli?
Nope, nothing any further to say right now.
Okay, well, I would like to really thank the community participants, the questions that were asked, that were addressing all different aspects of this decision, the dispatch services, what happens to the money if there is a savings by joining regional dispatch. What are the service needs that we have in public safety? And certainly one of them is dispatch. And there are other needs that have not been addressed for many years, despite requests to have those needs met. Sean made a comment about, you should look at how underfunded dispatch has been over such a long period of time. And I think that's an important point. The budgets that have been submitted and the budgets that have been vetted through FinCom and through the town administrator and through the Board of Selectmen and coming before the town on town meeting floor reflect a process that has been for years trying to balance off different needs throughout the community. From my point of view, public safety is a paramount need, and that we need to try and do our best to address that. We've had a whole gamut of opinions and concerns, and I want to thank you for your participation. So I will entertain a motion from the Board of Selectmen.
Wait, may I ask a question? When are we supposed to vote?
Could you please identify yourself and where you live?
Excuse me, I'm Martha Main. I live in Manchester. When are we supposed to?
Excuse me, Martha, on what street?
10 Butler.
Thank you.
When are we supposed to vote on this?
This is a vote of the Board of Selectmen.
So we are not supposed to vote at all. I mean, yeah, right? I received an invitation to vote, and that's what I don't understand.
You received an invitation from whom?
Never mind, it's obviously off. I will not be voting, sorry. Okay,
Okay, I'm sorry if your understanding was that there was going to be a vote tonight.
Yes.
The vote on this decision is a vote of the Board of Selectmen.
right. Well,
And,
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
we're not doing our vote tonight.
thank you. Thank you.
The purpose of the forum was to get public input, to respond to public questions, to clarify information that was needed to understand what this decision is all about.
Thank you very much. I misunderstood the request to vote. That's all. Over.
Okay, thank you. I would entertain a motion from the Board of Selectmen to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, so moved by Becky Jakes and seconded by John Round. Roll call vote. Mr. Boland,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Round,
yes.
Ms. Jakes.
Yes.
I almost missed you, Becky. Mr. Bodmer
I wouldn't
Turner.
let that happen.
Mr. Bodmer Turner votes yes. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for joining us for this public forum. We have a regular Board of Selectmen meeting on Monday night, the 20th at 6:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Right.